Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Hi there, this is Brian Gracely, and in this video we're going to talk about sort of this buzzword that we're all hearing about, but you're probably either confused about it or you're really annoyed with it. So we thought we'd sort of talk about what is software defined and why all of a sudden is everything being talked about in the context of software defined. So we've heard it in people like VMware talking about the software-defined data center, and you hear about people talking about software-defined networking and now software-defined storage, from everybody who makes hardware to everybody who makes software. So why are we hearing about it all of a sudden, and why does it matter, or does it matter? So let's sort of start with the basics. The reason we're hearing about software-defined everything is basically we have this impedance mismatch, if you will. We have all the things that previously were hardware, so whether it's the network, or whether it's storage, or whether it's servers, and then you had the pace at which people were trying to get applications on top of all these things, right? And you could argue that, some applications are big and nasty and would take forever no matter how simplified all this infrastructure was. But what came along was we had, server virtualization come along and sort of built this ability on top of the servers, which is obviously the most closely linked to applications, and started to make it simpler to deploy these applications for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, instead of having to think about procuring physical servers, I could do that once, plug them in, wire them up to a storage network, wire them up to a Ethernet network or some variation of that, and then I could just start carving out chunks of that server, just like an apartment building, into virtual machines, and I could do those virtual machines very, very quickly. So what you had was the pace at which you could get an application onto a server began to get faster. And that's been going on for 4, 5, 6 years, depending on how long you've been playing around with virtualization, whatever type of virtualization. And what started happening was people started saying, wait a second, this is beginning to go faster, and we're able to take advantage of Moore's Law and x86 technology here. Why can't we do that in really the other disciplines that go along with what things in your data center, right? So the next thing that started to sort of evolve to the software-defined stuff was some of these network functions, specifically the layer 4 through 7 types of functions, firewalls, load balancers, IDS types of things, SS7 offload or SSL offload types of devices, started to become virtual appliances. Right? We started to see various vendors and various open source projects begin to make these layer 4 through 7 virtual appliances. And so as I wanted to roll out an application, put it on a virtual machine, and I needed some layer 4 through 7 services, again, firewall, load balancing, whatever, I could put them in a virtual machine, put that technology in a virtual machine, beef up that virtual machine, make it as robust in terms of performance and CPU and memory and so forth as I wanted to, and I could begin to use this layer of automation that was living up here. And I could begin to leverage that for both my servers and my layer 4 through 7 types of things. So now I'm sort of starting to move into the network space for software defined. And where we've really gotten to since then is we've gotten people, that's servers, and that's storage. We've started to have people say, well, storage is really just servers with a bunch of disk drives in them. Why can't we begin to look at storage as a software-defined kind of concept? We're still going to have disks or flash or cache or whatever that is, but could I begin to do the separate the control plane from the data plane thing with storage, and begin to say, hey, as soon as I need a virtual machine and I need to attach it to storage, why can't I begin to automate it and begin to leverage this same sort of concept of saying, leverage consistent hardware, leverage automation, and begin to make the pace at which I can roll this out start to match what I can roll this out. And again, once you start getting a couple of elements in the data center start moving in a direction, you get the line of business or you get the administrative team who start saying, that feels better, that's working better, that's solving problems faster. Then they start to chip away and they start to say, why do I have other elements that aren't moving in that same pace? And that's why we're beginning to see software-defined networking start to come into play. We're starting to see software-defined storage sort of come into play. And again, really what this is some people will say, well, it's about control plane and data plane, and maybe we're trying to commoditize some stuff. And some of that comes into play because we do have more and more availability of merchant silicon for networking. We have faster and faster CPUs and Moore's law around services, servers and storage. But really what we're getting to is I want to start to make my IT operations, my ability ultimately to deploy these new applications on this infrastructure, go at a consistent pace, go at a faster pace, and ultimately, hopefully, begin to leverage a broader set of automation tools to be able to service the business across all these things. And so ultimately, that's why we're hearing software-defined everything. Now, is it confusing sometimes? Yeah, absolutely, because in the data center we do tend to have silos between network and servers and storage. So you're going to have some pace mismatches. You're going to have some technologies that are going to move faster. Obviously, server virtualization has moved much faster than SDN, which is still kind of confusing, and software-defined storage, which is still pretty complicated. But this is the reason we're starting to see more and more people talk about software-defined everything. Ultimately, yes, there's some vendors that are trying to impact incumbent vendors, but ultimately it's because customers want to see this pace match this pace, match this pace, which is ultimately being driven by their business wanting to go faster to drive revenue or to reduce costs. So that's why we're hearing software-defined everything. Part of it's because the underlying technologies are moving very, very quickly, but more so it's because people want more and more applications deployed for the business to solve IT problems and business problems, and because the technology pieces are starting to align themselves much, much better. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for listening.